Hello, I'm Tony Christ in Falls Church, Virginia. Today I'm going to conduct our podcast. Our show is called Sunshine and Transparency, and that's the market closing, and it's 4 p.m., so it's time to begin. I'll say a few words about our show. First of all, I'm going to say the following twice. I want to welcome all newcomers to the show. We hope you'll watch us at 4 p.m. on Fridays live on YouTube. If you miss it, you can access it on YouTube by dialing in on YouTube, Sunshine and Transparency. Our show is not MSNBC, it's not Fox, it's not CNN, it's not Newsmax. We're trying to bring things to your attention that you haven't heard anywhere else. And we're all about the truth. We try to factually determine our information as best we can. We have a standing offer. If anyone can correct any errors we have, we'd be very appreciative. And our information in the last few weeks has covered the maternal instinct. Is it instinctive or not? Mothering. We spent some time on that. We talked about abortion too. The fact that 65% of those who have abortions require some level of psychiatric care afterwards. We talked about the hormone that's released from a mother to a child that's also released to a father. And we're going to talk about that more in the future. We also talked about dinosaurs who reigned the earth for 150 million years. And we talked about that and we brought it to present time. We've had religion discussions that are going to be ongoing in the future too. So I want to welcome you again. My name is Tony Christ. The name of the program is Sunshine and Transparency. Today we're going to talk about narcotics. And it's a very sobering thing for me. Many of you don't know, but when I was young, when I was in college, I had a period of time, had some pains due to athletics, and had a period of time where I was doing drugs. This is back in the 1960s. Okay, I just dated myself, and when that subsided, I formed Bacon Street, which is still in operation today in Williamsburg, run by Sandy Fagan, a drug treatment center. Later, I became a narcotics officer. Fast forward 30 years, we had a tragedy. We lost our son at UVA to a heroin overdose. And so this is a very tender subject for me. But these facts you need to know. Most of what I'm going to discuss today comes from a book just released by Peter Schweitzer. It's called Blood Money. And it is totally alarming. And I hope you're seated to start listening to this. First, I want to say something that is in Schweitzer's book. Sun Tzu wrote The Art of War, and in the book he says the strategy, the art of war, the Chinese strategy uses the art of war to conduct its war against America. And what is that strategy? Well, Sun Tzu says it's to subdue the enemy without fighting. Subdue the enemy without fighting. Now, how are they conducting this war against us? Well, stay seated. Here we go. Drug overdose deaths, fentanyl inspired, continued to set records over the last 3 years. Now, notice they were terrible before 3 years. But let me give you the numbers. 2021, 106,699. 2022, 109,680. 2023, over 112,000, a record every year during Mr. Biden's administration. That doesn't mean that they were not very significant in Trump's administration. And are they being dealt with? Well, I mean, if they're setting a record every year, I would say we're not dealing with it. Wouldn't you agree? In any of the 3 years, we lost more civilians to drug overdose than we lost in Vietnam, Iraq and Afghanistan combined over a decade. And this is in 3 years. Matter of fact, we lost 460,000 in World War II in 4 years. And we're tracking at 337,000 in 3 years right now from drug overdoses. Fentanyl is the largest cause of death for anyone aged 45 and under. So the majority of deaths are to young, productive people. They're not old guys like me. Fentanyl's killed more Americans in a single year than were killed in the atomic bombing of Nagasaki. In a single year, it's killed more. Politicians have chosen to be willfully ignorant, complicit by indifference. And you're going to see I'm not partisan about this as this goes on. And thank God for Mr. Schweitzer's in-depth study. We're going to talk about both political parties and the culpability they face. They've chosen to be willfully ignorant. They have what Churchill calls vacant eyes. Many of their names will be familiar. President Joe Biden, Senator Mitch McConnell, Governor Gavin Newsom, Adam Schiff, Barack Obama, Bush. The opium, let's go back in history and let's connect the dots. Why are the Chinese methodically conducting their war presently with fentanyl? It was opium starting in 1950 and other narcotics, but it's graduated to fentanyl. Why are they doing that? To subdue the enemy. Well, Schweitzer cites the Opium Wars in China from 1830 to 1860. In 1830, China was the world leader in trade. England primarily conducted operations, but we were with them. The United States was not uninvolved. And in effect, there were two opium wars. And by the end, by 1860, we had destroyed China as a leading trade leading trade entity in the world. And 25% of the Chinese population in 1860 was addicted to opium. Well, they still remember it. The military in China and the CCP, the Communist Party, still talk about the opium wars. And when they're conducting war on us, they do it without any shame or any regret, and it's purely business, as you'll see. In the 1950s, the Communist Party took control. In July of 1958, Swiss officials seized $30 to $50 million worth of opium in Switzerland that came from China. So this is a worldwide operation. Although they've focused on us recently, they are very big in distributing drugs to the world. It's not only the cartels. Matter of fact, you're going to see they work with the cartels. The Nixon administration was hiding evidence at the time that Beijing, and in particular the Communist Party and the People's Liberation Army, as well as the Chinese Triads, which are the equivalent of the cartels, were conducting massive distributions of opium. Now, why would they do that? Well, Nixon got the credit of opening up China, if you remember. Now, this is way back in the 1950s, and he was given all the credit for opening up China for trade. But even he hid the fact of their drug dealing back in the 1950s. It's a shame. It's a shame our leaders have been so complicit about this for 3/4 of a century. Between 89 and 93, George W. Bush administration continued to insist that all evidence that China was cooperating with the US government to combat international drugs was their public position, but they weren't. So how many leaders in America have mouthed it? Matter of fact, I think Biden last night in the State of the Union talked about fighting fentanyl. But what's happened? Our younger generations are dying every day over it. It has not stopped. Now we get to Joe Biden. In 1992, Joe Biden, who was serving his fourth term and was the chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee, convened hearings on drug trafficking in China. And he stated China has become a major trafficking router and is poised to become the linchpin of the heroin trade in the world. This is Joe Biden. This is a quote from Joe Biden in 1992, 32 years ago. The new heroin corridor joint hearing of the Judiciary Committee and Caucus on International Narcotics in the 192nd Congress is where Joe Biden said these words. So even though he's very good at pretending he has loss of memory, I can see it all the time, but how could you forget that the source was not only Chinese rogues and Chinese gangsters, but the Chinese CCP, the Chinese Communist Party, was tied in with these entities and conducting it. And Joe Biden was aware of it in 1992. The third of our presidents that was less than honest with us about drug traffic. The other two were Republicans. He, of course, is a Democrat. The Chinese People Political Consultative Conference, CPPCC, a central part of the CCP's system of rule, suspected tryout members involving in drug cartel were members of it. So in other words, the triad members, which are the Chinese gangs, the equivalent of the Mexican cartels, they work closely with the Mexican cartels, were also had positions in the CCP, the higher ups in the Chinese gangs. Now you're talking significant monies when you're talking about this, and we're going to get to that later too. So they were suspected triad members involved in the drug trade, and they populated the CPPCC in China. Lap Sang, the triad member who funneled money to Bill Clinton's campaign in 1994, was a member. Now we pull Clinton in. A significant contributor to his campaign in 94 was a member not only of the CCP, but of the Chinese drug cartels called Triads in China. A member of both the political governing body and the cartel. Obama came into office wanting to de-emphasize the drug wars. Now, why was that? Probably he was ignorant at first, but later you're going to see that he's culpable too. In 2009, he removed the drug czar from the cabinet to de-emphasize drugs. He de-emphasized drugs fighting in foreign policy. Burma, a long-known center for international drug trade with Chinese involvement, saw economic sanctions removed by the Obama administration. Now, he removed all sanctions on Burma. Now, the interesting thing about this is Jeffrey Katzenberg comes into the picture, the big promoter from DreamWorks, who's not only Obama's chief fundraiser, he also today in 2024 is Biden's chief fundraiser. He had extensive dealings with the Chinese, totaling many tens of millions of dollars. So he didn't want any administration, any US administration to rock the boat, and nor did they. So here you had Obama relying on a fundraiser who had extensive ties with the Chinese, not a Chinese himself, It was the DreamWorks promoter, Jeffrey Katzenbach, for God's sakes. He was raising money for, he's raising money presently for Joe Biden. Now, my God, that's a conflict. I mean, you don't even have to deal with the allegations that the Biden family received 5, 10 million, which are probably more than allegations. But these kinds of activities are in direct conflict with our interest, which is that this trafficking should be stopped immediately. That's the American interest. It's non-political. It's killing our people. Obama administration knew the fentanyl precursors were coming from China. And John Kerry, at that time, during the Obama administration's sole action was to write a letter to the United Nations asking the United Nations to ban the sale of fentanyl. Well, that's about as effective as nothing. The UN is often, whoever listens to the UN. If the UN had any power, they wouldn't even be fighting in Ukraine right now. Enforcing the issue with China would have been challenging and disruptive for President Obama and his post-presidential plans. Well, what were his post-presidential plans? After leaving office, Obama appeared in Shanghai at the Global Small and Medium-Sized Enterprise Summit and charged $900 to shake his hand and $40,000 a piece for a photograph with the ex-president Obama. So he started to have ties directly and make monetary gains that were very visible. This is not to speak of the $60 million book deal he signed and other dealings. So he had plans, Obama. He didn't just become worth 50, 100 million out of nowhere. When he entered the presidency, he was worth $650,000. Okay, if anyone's curious, 8 years before. So he had dealings with him. So nobody is rocking the boat. Everybody is talking the talk and nobody's walking the walk. And we are losing Americans every day. This should be intolerable. The Chinese narco gangs have joined the Mexican cartels. In the Sinaloa cartel and the Jalisco cartel, the basic pharmaceutical ingredients to produce fentanyl come from China, the northern China city, west of Beijing, and Wuhan. They also come from Wuhan. Well, that one sounds familiar. Guess what else came from there? I guess we should ask Anthony Fauci if his memory comes back, which is dubious. He seems to be suffering the same thing our president, Calamity Joe, suffers. In any case, in northern Mexico, some 2,000 Chinese in Mexico, and the reason they're in Mexico is it allows them to deflect direct responsibility for what they're doing. Some 2,000 Chinese nationals work assembling fentanyl and methamphetamine precursors at Port Manzanillo and Puerto de Lacero outside of Mexico City. And I understand they own the rights to these ports. The Mexicans don't even own them. So the Chinese Triads, the Chinese cartel gangs that are direct arms of the CCP, the Chinese Communist Party, they're not unrelated. And it's been known for the last 30, 40 years, this is nothing new, are working right at the ports in Mexico. And frankly, the governor of Florida is about the only politician and of course, it's a shame he didn't have standing and he's younger and he couldn't make it to the candidacy. But he's the only one that stated what he'd do. He'd unleash the military on all the cartels, and I assume he would have thrown the triads in too. And that's what needs to happen. The border, we're being overrun on the border, and it's not only with hardworking, lying asylum seekers. They all claim asylum, and then we know for a fact 95%, and that's a conservative number, are lying. They're not asylum seekers, but they're taking advantage of a system that nobody seems that that the governing party doesn't seem to want to do anything about and has been relying on for 3 years to allow people into the country. The Zhang drug syndicate or cartel operated out of nondescript warehouses north of Boston. In other words, they're in the country too, operating. The drugs are prepared, the ingredient drugs are prepared, and they're put, if they're not put into medicine, the formulation of the fentanyl is determined in Mexico and sent here. But I understand there are even drug machines here in this country that put them into capsule form and bottle them in all kinds of fraudulent manners. And in other words, people don't even know what they're taking. Fentanyl, incidentally, is 30 times more powerful than heroin. Now, listening to this, and we're going to stop and take a breath after I say this. The Zhang drug group, there was an arrest of one of the members in Boston. He's serving a 6-year prison term. God knows how many people he killed. In China, if you're convicted of trafficking narcotics, you know what happens? Death sentence. Death. You're dead. They kill you. Okay, not here. They know that. So this is very disturbing. And we're going to continue this discussion next week. Ismail will be back with us at the time. But I want to do this for 2 weeks because it's so profoundly destructive. The other thing I want to talk about is the money, because that's what it's all about, the money. Okay, now when you look at China and America today, and everybody says China's number 2, and I've begun to wonder how they get so much money to grow their military. Okay, now of course they're not spending what we're spending on it, and I only could wish ours was more efficient, our spending. But let me talk about it in a market context for you so you can see what's going on here, why these drugs are so important to the Communist Party of China. The Chinese stock market right now is about 9.8 billion. Now that means that the whole, if you add up the whole stock, the values of everything on the stock market, say one company is worth trading at 40 billion and so forth. Add it all up, it's about 9.8 trillion. The marginal product, now marginal product, let's just call it earnings. It's not exactly the same, but the marginal product, what those companies produce and throw off, is somewhere around 300 to 400 billion. Now, and I'm wondering how they could be pouring so much money. I got very curious about this into the military in China, which they're doing now at a ferocious pace. They could take all that money, that 300 to 400 billion marginal product, and it wouldn't be enough. Now, America's stock market is about 57, 58 trillion, and the marginal product is over 4 trillion. So you can see automatically it's 10 times bigger and 10 times more productive. It's not 10 times bigger, but it's 10 times more productive. It's about 6 times bigger than the Chinese market. And everybody talks about China being number 2. But where does the money come from? Why did Peter Schweitzer call his book Blood Money? I did some calculations. I think over $200 billion the CCP gets out of illegal drugs and the drug smuggling into America that's killing so many of our younger generation. In other words, if that were to stop, the Commerce Department today and other departments, they're worried about them importing EV cars at $9,000, which are in Puerto Rico and parts of South America. I don't give a shit about EV cars. I give a shit. The drugs is what they got to stop. The only way you can stop that is closing the border and getting the military heavily involved. And we need it direly. We need an honest leader, a leader that recognizes what's happening to the country. We don't want America to go the route that China did in the Opium Wars. And we're headed right there. We're breaking records every year. And Trump's stay was no different. He talked the talk too, but he didn't do anything to disrupt the drug triads from China and the cartels in Mexico. He did close the border, which did reduce the supply into the country, but he didn't go after them. And they still brought many drugs in, and still we had 70 plus thousand deaths. So Trump, the only way you could talk about Donald Trump is that he was less, he killed less on his watch. He killed less than Joe Biden's killed, but Joe Biden's breaking a record every day he breathes. And the irony is he was in the 92 hearings. He was the head of the hearing that determined that the CP was involved. Now, I don't care how bad your memory is. I'm old, my memory's bad too, but you remember that. When you connect those dots and you understand that a country's political operation, along with their narcotics and their underworld, are tied together. So I'm estimating they're getting over 200 billion from, they're getting maybe as much as they're getting from their whole stock market, all of their stocks together, not a silly EV car. They're getting it out of drugs and killing us. Just like just like I said to start this, when Sun Tzu wrote The Art of War, he said the first thing he said was to subdue your enemy without fighting is the goal of war. And they are at war with us. And Silly Joe talks about competition. In a fantasy world, he's right. We love them to compete with us, but they don't play the games right. They're not fair about anything they're doing. That's why they're putting pressure on us, and that's why we're withdrawing from that area of the world. But as far as killing us out of Mexico, they're physically right there killing Americans every day. Now, I want to tell you a little bit about this. Again, we're not anything you're going to see. We're not MSNBC, we're not Newsweek, we're not Fox, we're not CNN. We're here for you. We're here to try to determine the truth. We're not perfect, but we're going to introduce topics every week that bring new information to you. We appreciate you joining us. I'd like to welcome all new visitors to the site. We hope you stay with us. Ismail will be back next week, and we're going to continue talking about this narcotics invasion on the southern border. It should be the biggest concern for all Americans, and it feeds right into the enslaving of young girls and everything else, the sex trafficking on the border. All of it is tied in with the narcotics, the cartels, and the Chinese Triads. So we hope you have a blessed week. Our program is Sunshine and Transparency. You can Google us on YouTube. If you missed the show, you can watch it during the week. I can tell you again, you're welcome. We welcome you, the new viewers. We welcome you to the show. And again, wish you all a blessed week. And we hope to see you next week when we continue this discussion. Thank you so much. Bye now. Bye-bye.